Welcome, everyone. I am the Attendance Dropout Prevention Coordinator for Liberty Hill ISD. And I have been working in the field this is going on my 16th year. 12 of those years were directly related to dealing with truancy and attendance in general in Texas. So when I was asked to present, I thought about my part of my process that I am most proud of. And something that an attendance or an assistant principal said to me recently when we were discussing some students and staffing some situations. And she said, Sandy, there's just something about the attendance behavior improvement meeting that I don't know why, but we can work as hard as we want. But in that meeting, it's like it all comes out and we find solutions and we start working with families. So it made me think about the magic of that meeting. And I wanted to share a little bit of how that is developed in our district and how it's developed over time in my career in knowing how to handle that and improve attendance in general. First of all, I think we're all on the same page. If you're working in attendance, you understand why attendance matters. It is about so many things. It's about accountability ratings, long-term outcomes, funding implications, and especially in Texas, as we know that we're only given the funding for that student when they are present in school that day. It impacts our academic performance. It increases the number of dropouts we have. And we also know that it affects the social emotional disconnection of students who are not in school on a regular basis. One thing that I did not put on here that I also think it also affects our behaviors in school and our discipline. If a student is in attendance and doing well academic, they have less behavioral issues as well. Attendance is a system issue, not a student issue. And one of the things that I found through the years, and it's important to reframe how we're looking at attendance in our interventions. When I started out in this, I was in a district that this particular meeting that took place at the district level was actually called a pre-court trial. And what I found was we were setting the culture of that meeting to be confrontational from the very beginning. And for parents and students to feel like they're being attacked from the very beginning. So I quickly found that we needed to go from a compliance to an engagement, from punishment to problem solving. It becomes a support tool, not a punishment to participate in ABIPs. And you'll see if you run these correctly, you're going to have parents who are actually contacting you and asking if they can have this meeting before they come up on your radar. The role of leadership in this is to set the tone for supporting and meaningful interventions. It's barrier-focused, relationship-centered, data-informed, and prevention-driven. What this means is that you're training all of your stakeholders on your campuses to understand that our whole point is to figure out the why behind why they're not coming to school and not focusing on the not coming. And learning how to engage the student and the parent and start that relationship to where there's a trust built and that you can work together as a team to solve these problems. The data-informed part is really important because I think it's important that your stakeholders understand who they need to target, when they need to target them, and as well as so they can look at their interventions and know what's working and what's not working. And you, as a leader, can go back to them and work together to try to resolve those areas that maybe aren't as working as well. And I'm also getting to the point where we're preventing kids from reaching chronic absenteeism rather than overcoming chronic absenteeism. I've outlined our tier process within our district and clearly defined those thresholds in our district. It's important that all of this has clear processes as you go through it and understanding whose role is what and when that takes place. Our tier 1 is very much about creating a culture of good attendance that's not only district-wide, but it also on the campus itself is focused. It's attendance awareness campaigns. Every fall and right before breaks, we come up with a lot of attendance campaigns that are shared out through our social media, through Parent Square. We send letters home to the parent with the students. We also, the weekly letters that each campus sends home to parents always has something in regards to attendance in there. We do positive reinforcement and incentives. Rawi has the postcards. Excellent way for there to go out positive reinforcement. I love hearing from families saying, yeah, I got a postcard from Rawi telling me that my child's attendance improved for the last week. They love those little things. You would think they wouldn't, even at the high school level, they appreciate it. Then educate and inform. This is the area where your campus stakeholders, they step in and they start having interaction with those students and or those families. My assistant principals at this stage, at 7 or more full or part days, are required to hold some type of communication with the student and or the parent. And it depends on what level they're at. Elementary, it's 100% with the parent. And it can be, I always encourage, try to make it through a phone call at the very least. If you can't reach them, then send those emails. Sometimes do in person at this stage as well, whatever is convenient. And my secondary level at middle school, it depends on the student. Sometimes it's interaction with the student, but always with the parent is included. Sometimes it's only the parent. And then that's at the middle school. And then at the high school level, my assistant principals generally pull the student in, speak with the student, talk about attendance, make them aware of policies, talk about what the absences are from, and then they follow up with communication with the parent for the parent to be aware that they've spoke to their student. So those are the first two levels. And then at the third level is where the attendance behavior improvement plan comes in place. This is a cooperation between the district and the campuses. It is facilitated by the district. At our level, because we're small, that means me. I'm a lot of times people ask me how I do the entire district, as I'm the only member of the district level for attendance. I always tell them I have a team of assistant principals and counselors on every single campus. So I'm really not doing this alone. I do not do my part without collaboration from the campus. And so we have the ABIP at this level. We also have student and family engagement, which means that's an ongoing program that both the campus and myself are working on heavily to ensure that we're engaging with the families at this point. Is the attendance behavior improvement plan. So this is a tiered intervention aligned with a multi-tiered system of supports. It's activated when a student reaches truancy threshold or is chronically absent. In the state of Texas and most other states, chronically absent is usually defined as 10 full or part days of absences. At this point, it establishes communication, attendance expectations to student and the families, and it identifies clearly what the barriers are to attendance, and then it offers very targeted to what those barriers are interventions. The important thing is it's not done after that meeting is done. You must monitor progress and continue that engagement with the family at this point. The success depends on accurate identifying the root cause and intentional alignment of supports. It's a very much barrier-based problem-solving meeting. In order to come up with an effective ABIP, you have to move beyond the generic plans, aligning interventions to root causes. Not all absences equal the same solution. And avoid common pitfalls, treating ABIPs as a compliance document, lack of follow-through, inconsistent implementation across campuses. What I have found in working in, I've worked in 3 different districts doing attendance. And one of the biggest pitfalls is when you start treating this meeting as just a checkbox we check off in our interventions. That, okay, done, next, what do we do next? You really have to make this interactive, and you really have to take the time to make it fit each student and not just something that you're filling out the form, getting it done, and knowing that, okay, if they keep missing, we can just refer them to truancy court at this point. And the other part is if you do not follow through, if you don't have a system of tracking and seeing whether there's improvement and intervening and talking with the students and the family and working together for that improvement, you're going to see that it's not as effective as well. You also need to, some success factors are making sure your staff is trained on how to identify barriers, remove barriers, how to communicate, and to have a team effort between everyone, and setting clear processes. I have, for every single member of my team, they have what we call a quick reference that I've had laminated from them that actually has a, on one side, it has the process and the thresholds of each intervention. And on the back side, it has talking points for them and knowing how to identify those barriers and when speaking to parents, things to ask, and also pitfalls of things to avoid saying. And I find that this is very helpful in creating consistency across the entire district. And then the other part is I make myself available. My team knows that if they have a situation and they're not sure how they can handle it, they can get a hold of me. So whether it's through instant messaging me or it's through phone calls or text messages, I will get back to them in a timely manner. And I will answer their questions for them. And if I can't figure it out, they know that I'll reach out to someone in the district that will be able to figure it out. Because I think a lot of times you can create these processes but you don't offer the support behind it. So when people run into areas they're not sure about, that's when you start getting inconsistencies or lack of follow through. And I also make sure on this that if I have new stakeholders, whether it be attendance clerks or registrars or my assistant principals on the campus, that I do regular check-ins with them throughout the year to see how they're doing. I try to make that in person if possible. But if not, then we just do a virtual meeting where we can talk, or we do a phone call to make sure that they're getting the support they need and they understand the process. So how do we set the stage for a successful ABIP once you have the family here? One of the things that I have made with this meeting is it is a required in-person meeting for my parents. And I know in the age of coming out of COVID where everything is virtual that you might get some pushback initially if you're not already requiring this. I've actually taken statistics on those situations where I've allowed a parent to either do it by phone or we've allowed virtual. Maybe there's transportation issues. Maybe I cannot nail the parent down to come in at all, and I would rather meet with them in some form than other. And I have found that those families that participate by phone or virtual, 95% of them are not successful. And I end up having to do a truancy referral. My families who meet in person, 30% or less are not successful. So that is a pretty big difference to share with my families when they're pushing for me to do a virtual meeting or a phone meeting. Most of my families who are pushing for that, who could actually make arrangements, usually end up coming in and meeting in person. And I think it's important because it allows for disconnect from everything else and for us to sit down as a team and across from one another, and it's more personal, and they see that we're all working together. And this meeting is a cross-functional collaboration. It is required that the counselor and the assistant principal be present. If they're not able to be present, if something comes up, because we know there can be things on campuses where they weren't expecting it and they have to take care of something else, I ask that they share the information or they share another, or they have another team member come in to the meeting to sub for them at that time. And this begins that whole idea of creating a team. I frequently tell my students at the secondary level when we sit down, I have everyone introduce themselves and I let them know, I want you to know that this is your team in this room. We're all here to support you for the same goal, and that is to graduate from high school. And I think creating that team creates the whole idea that we have an ongoing communication going on. And it also shows the family that we're all on the same page, we're all communicating, and that information that we leave there with, we all truly understand our next goals and what we're supposed to be doing. I think a lot of times when you have lack of communication between the parties, you might see that the student and or the family will kind of do what we call that parent splitting thing, where they try to say, well, the AP told me we were completely okay, or the counselor said we didn't need to worry about the attendance, and or that Miss Scott talked to us and told us that our grades were great and we weren't failing anything. And so because we communicate so well, that doesn't happen. And you'll find I'm going to talk about how that communication doesn't stop after this meeting. It needs to continue. It needs to be something that everyone recognizes, that we work together, that and I will tell my families in this meeting that you don't necessarily have to contact all three of us. If there's something going on, you contact one of us. It's as good as contacting the team. We will share it out. And that is truth, that my campus stakeholders are really good at communicating out situations that are happening. Once you've set the stage in this meeting and you've set the stage of teamwork, working together, the student having a voice, and the family engagement, you start a collaborative plan with the family. And that plan is going to identify those barriers during it. So you'll find that, and I can share out our ABIP form as well with everyone so they can see what we use, but you specifically identify, why is the student missing? And if the student tells you, I don't like school, I write that down. Then I do some probing to find out why. But I'm very specific on identifying that barrier. Once you've identified it, then you start targeting, how can we remove that? How can we remove it so you will be here every day? Once you've come up with a plan that removes the barrier and allows for that students to attend, then you set your clear expectations. What are your expectations for attendance? In my meetings, it's very clear. No more unexcused absences for the remainder of the school year. And if they are absent, we have to have either a doctor's note or the school nurse excuse them. And then monitoring timeline. That's where RAWI comes into place. We have the ability to set it to receive an email when a student is missing, but I also have set up plans throughout my week where I stop and I pull out my students and I start going through my students and looking at their attendance and seeing how they're doing. And then I start making a list. Do I need to speak to this student again? Should I send an email just saying they're doing great? Do I need to reach out to mom and have a phone conversation? So I start taking notes, and what's my follow through on what I discover when I'm monitoring and seeing how we're doing after the meeting. Barrier-based problem solving. So I've given some very common barriers that many of you may have seen. I think number one is a lot of us see mental health, and I think anxiety and depression are probably my number one thing I'm dealing with when it comes to what barriers students have. And in dealing with this, it can vary from district to district. It depends on what kind of support you have from that. If they haven't been coming to school, a lot of times we'll come up with a re-entry plan. So how can we return you to school? Does it look like when you arrive at school, you're going to check into the counselor's office and we're going to have you work for a half an hour to 45 minutes and then see if we can't transition you back into some classes at that point? If you have mental health support on campus, can you do a referral to that mental health specialist? I know for us, we don't offer mental health counseling, but we do have a mental health counselor who can do check-ins with students when they're having a hard day, and they can also assist with parents in establishing outside services. Then there's the academic frustration. That's why we make sure to include our counselors in the meeting as well, because if we've got certain classes that a student is not doing well in, and maybe they need to level down, so our counselor needs to be part of that conversation because that could be a schedule change. Maybe we're seeing that we need to do regular check-ins because this may be a student that needs to be tested and we haven't identified that they have some learning disabilities. Maybe we've got our assistant principal in there. The student is having issues with a particular student in some classes, so they've been avoiding that class, a peer conflict. So our assistant principal can problem solve that, and maybe we need a stay away contract. So there's an array of things that can come up, and that's why we need all of our campus personnel in those meetings so they can participate and they can help us problem solve and find the solutions before we leave the meeting. Another one that's a big one that comes across for us is caregiving. We have students, in fact, this just came up this week. I have a student whose mom got changed to a nighttime shift, does not get home until 8 o'clock in the morning, and there's a 2-year-old in the home. And mom has not been able to find anybody else to watch the 2-year-old, so he was consistently arriving late to school. In his situation, we talked about possibly having him transfer to our alternative campus that's and at your own pace. It's called Success. They have more flexibility with scheduling. So we might be able to give him that flexibility of coming in a little bit later and then staying a little bit later. So you've got to be kind of creative as things come up. And that didn't necessarily come up during our initial meeting. It came up during my monitoring recently when I noticed he was coming late to school, and I pulled him in. I scheduled an appointment to talk with mom, and that's how we're trying to troubleshoot it. Just showing you those areas that you may need to, when you're monitoring, may come up and a new barrier arises. So then you need to address that new barrier. So how do we scale the ABIP across the district? Because one of the things that I found very difficult when I was working in a larger district and was the lack of consistency could heavily affect you. None of us want to know, especially if we work at a district level, that a student transfers from one high school to another high school, and when they come to the new high school, they're holding their students more accountable for attendance, and you hear from the parent, well, we were at such and such high school, and they had twice as many absences last year there, and nobody cared. And we know there's nothing that shoots us in the foot faster than it comes to inconsistencies. So it's important that you standardize the process. This also comes with, I know anyone who's been with RAWI and been in the trainings, we get this told over and over again. We've got to have buy-in from the district, from the very top, the superintendent on down. And I'm very fortunate that I work in a district that is the case. And so we've been able to create a very standardized process in which the expectations on each campus are exactly the same. And you need to train the staff on barrier-based conversations. I know when I came into this district, I found it wasn't so much about punishment and the punitive end of it that they were dealing with. They were dealing with, as long as the student made up their hours, because in the state of Texas, if a student misses more than 10% of a class per semester, they have to make up that time in order to receive their credit. And so they were focusing on that. And then we had this race going on where students would just make up hours but keep missing. And I'm like, we didn't resolve anything from that. And so I talked to them about, we need to be talking about why they're not coming to school. And is it because they're not engaged and they feel those classes they are missing, there's not enough engagement? That's a campus issue with instruction, and that, you need the buy-in from your administration to identify that and provide that that instruction and that training to their teachers to have engaging classrooms where students realize if they want to do well in a class, they have to be present. So, that just gives you a few examples of what that might be. Another part is document and communicate. This is where RAWI is huge for us because our workflow is not only in there, but communicate. When I have an AP who contacts me to tell me something's going on with the student and everything, one of my first questions is, did you put it in RAWI? Because when I end up the year with over 300 students and I've been in one-on-one meetings with them and their family, I don't always remember all of these conversations I have with my APs. So it's very important that when I pull up a student, I should be able to see all of those notes in there. And when I go into an ABIP, My APs have been trained very clearly on how to communicate with me. So I know exactly the conversation they've had with their parents, and I know what's taken to place, and I know the date that they talked to them. And I know whether they were able to get in touch with the parent or not. Maybe they weren't even able to leave a voicemail. And I can let that parent know that, hey, Mrs. White had contacted you on September 15th, it says here. She wasn't able to actually speak to you, but I believe it looks like she left you a voicemail. And this is what she indicated about that meeting. That in itself impresses parents. Number one, for those that maybe want to make the excuses and tell you no one has told them, they haven't talked to anybody, they had no idea, this immediately stops that conversation. Number two, for those parents who feel like they're tired of talking to people and re-explaining themselves all the time, they understand we're communicating, we're sharing information, and I am aware and I am up to date with what's going on. And it opens that line of communication to make it a more of a positive interaction that I have with the families. And then the other part is monitor district-wide data trends. I frequently will send out different data to individuals, letting them know. We recently had some troubles with our calendar, and we had to add in some dates. And in doing so, I wanted to see how that was actually affecting our attendance. So I sent that information out to the people that needed to know about it and know if our attendance was dropping during those times. Another instance was we chose not to observe President's Day this year. So I wanted to see, did that affect our attendance? Because as we know, a lot of parents are off President's Day. So did they choose to do a 3-day weekend and have their kids off that day as well? So I like to share out that information because data trends can help us to improve in areas that are hurting us. And if our calendar is hurting us, that's an easy fix as a district we should be fixing. It also can help campuses know, hey, you did great last 6 weeks, but look, we fell down this 6 weeks, and look, it's your 6th grade class. What's going on with your 6th grade class? Let's focus on them. And then also, I always make sure when I come back in the summer before we start the year, I make sure all my documentation supports compliance that is required. And that means updating, changing whatever needs to be changed. If it's a legislative year here, it's up to me to research that, look at that, and look if I need to make any changes to support that. This year, I'm actually putting in place, because we've been going long enough, this is year number 3, I'm actually going to create an attendance committee that I'm going to be pulling in attendance assistant principals from different levels, as well as counselors and my attendance clerks and registers, so we can look at how can we improve, what's working, what's not working, because I feel like every year you should be looking at what works in your system and what doesn't work. So that's going to be one of my goals this year, is to get that committee so I can get feedback from all different stakeholders. Does it work? So I want to tell you that when I started out in education in Texas, the very first year, I worked with a counselor that was very creative, and one of those that was all about removing those barriers and let's get these kids graduated. And she retired that year. So unfortunately, I only got a year with her. But she passed off to me my very own magic wand. And so I have this wand that sits on my desk all the time to remind me that when I think I can't solve something, I need to think hard about what my goal is and how can we get to that goal, and be very creative about it. So these are our numbers to date here in regards to our interventions. And what you'll see is from letter 1 to letter 2, we were down 63%. That means that 63% of the parents who received our letter 1, which is at a threshold of 3 or more in a 4-week period, did not move on to our second letter of 7 or more total. And then our letter 2 people, we went down by 65% and did not need the letter 3, which is our truancy letter of 10 or more. And then you'll see today we've closed 1,237 campus level conferences by my assistant principals. We've to date closed 280 attendance behavior improvement meetings. And only 23% of the students who got the letter 3 went on to need the attendance behavior improvement plan. And then to date, I've filed 91 truancy referrals, which means less than 30% of those who've participated in the attendance behavior improvement plan actually did not improve and needed to be referred to truancy court in order to improve attendance. So I think that those numbers show you that it actually works, and that there is magic behind this meeting in the fact that those students who come to this meeting are the ones that have not been able to improve. We have not been able to identify. And once we do that, very few of them need to go on to truancy court at that point. I also wanted to share attendance over a 3-year period in the district to kind of show you the trend that we've been on. And it has been a very fast upward trend. I do anticipate you do reach a certain level. We're going to start leveling out, and our increments will probably be a little bit slower, but that doesn't mean we're not shooting to be higher every year. I want to tell you that every year I start out with my assistant principals, and I have them set their attendance goals for the year. And I also have them set how they're going to accomplish that. And then I share that out with the principals so they know what their assistant principals' goals are.